Okay, so let's move on to step 4, the full A-frame with end opening or openings. And you can see how this is essentially the same as step 2, the basic lean-to, and step 3, the standard lean-to. Your starting point is going to be step 2, your basic lean-to. And there it is there. You've got a basic lean-to up on a tree, supported between two trees. And just as a reminder, 8 feet apart's always a good dimension. It's going to vary, of course. 6 foot poles at 45-degree angles will give you a ridge height of around 4 to 4.5 feet, thereabouts. That's always a good starting point. I like 6 foot poles because I'm a bit under 6 foot, so if you just measure a pole above my head, I know it's going to be about 6 feet. That's what you need to do, work out those measurements. You're not going to have a tape measure out there. And the poles can be around 2 inch or a bit thinner. The ridge pole can be a bit thicker to get a bit of strength. And those vertical support poles, 6 is always a good starting point, or more, to make it easier and stronger to make. And you weave those thinner, longer, more pliable sticks between those vertical roof supports to form your matrix of the roof. Then on top of that is your roof material, grass, leaves and so forth. Now if you increase those dimensions, you can make a bigger shelter. What about 7 foot poles, 8 foot poles? Your ridge height could be higher. You can have more coverage and more people and so forth. Okay, so there's the basic shelter right there. You're going to have your basic lean-to like that. Then what you're going to do is build simply an A-shaped roof. You can consider it as being 2 back-to-back lean-tos, just like that. The same roof on both sides. It gives good coverage from the elements, especially if you've got it at least 8 feet apart. You can be in there laying down. You can lay down at an angle to give more distance between the ends in case the rain comes in at an angle and so forth. But if you're going to lay 2 or 3 people, that's where you may have to start enclosing the ends, just to stop that weather from coming in at the ends. Now, as for these ends, I've got 2 main options to start with. The first one, what I've abbreviated to be A-frame to the enclosure. Now you can leave both ends open if you like. You just may want ventilation, you may like that sort of shelter, and especially if you don't have time, that's your first step, is to build your basic lean-to. You got your both ends open. And if you've got that 8 foot distance, as I said, you've got plenty of coverage anyway. Then you can fully enclose one end if you like, and have the other end open. Then you can enclose a half of the other end, which I call a quarter end, and leave yourself with a quarter end as your entrance to get in. That's exactly what I do in the series of 13 videos making my pen shelter online. The second option is what I've abbreviated to being the lean-to to the enclosure. Now what you can do once you build your lean-to, you can then enclose or block off those triangle shapes on both ends, or those L-shaped openings, to form a couple of walls on both sides to give yourself a bit of enclosure. Then when you build your full A-frame, in effect you're going to have 2 quarter ends open, and again you can block off one end totally and leave 1 quarter end as your entrance. Your third main option is actually to step back to the last video. You can build your step 3, and that's the beautiful thing about this whole process and these steps, is because it's all essentially the same shelter and you've got quite a few options. So once you've built your basic lean-to, let's forget about the ends for the time being. You build your awning roof out the front. Instead of a full A-frame, that's the previous video, your 2 awning support poles out the front on both ends to support lintels, and a bit of an awning roof coming down. How far? A quarter, a third, a halfway down, and you've got your big side opening. You can enclose both ends, and then you've virtually got step 3. And just to repeat, to close off the ends just involves more poles in a fan shape coming out, and throw your material up, interweave smaller sticks and put your material up. It's just like I demonstrate in those videos online. So now you can see how step 4 is just really an extension of step 2, and even step 3 is an extension of step 2. But the critical thing to mention is that step 3 is really what I regard as a standalone shelter. It's really an end product. I think you need to decide whether you want to go to step 3 or this step 4 full A-frame from the step 2. It's really a choice between having a large side opening or a full A-shape roof. It's really that choice is what you need to make. In theory, you can go from step 3 to step 4, but you've already enclosed both ends and you may have to rip out one end to make an entrance. That doesn't take much work, but you've mucked around with a lot of work and energy to build your step 3, the awning, roof and so forth, and then if you want to get a step 4, you've sort of wasted time and mucked around there. So like I said, it's really a choice to go from step 2 to go to either step 3 or step 4. At the moment I'm preferring to go to step 4 as it gives more coverage, but again you may want that large side opening for a fire. That's fine. That gives you the best sort of big opening, get the heat, convection currents of a fire coming in. A potential drawback to step 4, this shelter, is that you may not get that heat from the fire into the shelter. You can have a fire out the end, well that's where your fire has to be. You still may get heat in, it just depends. You can partially overcome that problem by building your firewalls, fire reflectors and so forth to bounce or reflect heat back into your shelter. So that's really the issue you have. So it's all about essentially how much coverage you want and enclosure you want, and potentially how many people you want to sleep. If you have 2 or 3 people, I think you're looking more so to get this sort of full A-frame to get better coverage. And that's the bonus to this full A-frame. But again, it all comes down to also the weather conditions. Is it hot? Is it cold? How much enclosure you want? How much openness you want? And how many people are going to be in there? So they're the factors you have to think of, going from step 2 to either step 3 or step 4. So they're the main key points to my step 4, the full A-frame.